Today on the Burning Archive, as we are welcomed by the music Three Great Rivers from the game Civilization 5. We're talking about the game Civilization and what exactly is the cradle of civilization. The game Civilization presents the player with the opportunity to found and lead a civilization from the dawn of time. If successful, the player will experience the ultimate triumph of human ingenuity, space travel to replant your civilization near another galaxy, or if they choose that route, world domination by means of war, diplomacy, or cultural influence. If of the game has something of a tarnished past, and especially when civilization is compared to something barbarian or something primitive, it has been used a few too many times, perhaps by people who wish to dominate the world in real life, not just those who wish to play at being a deity in a computer game. So is the concept of civilization useful for thinking about history rather than designing computer games? What do people mean by the cradle of civilization? And this episode is prompted by a question that Isaac Rich asked in episode 32 of the Burning Archive. This archive is for the players, and it's such a big question that what I'm going to do is actually divide this question into 3 parts, no less. And today we're talking about the concepts, or in this episode we're talking the concepts and cradles of civilization. And then the next episode we're talking about civilizations in different environments in different parts of the globe, and the emphasis there is on the plural, civilizations. And then finally we're going to talk a bit about decay, progress, and narratives of civilizations. Do they have a natural life, an organic life, and a rhythm of rise and fall like empires? Okay, so let's first of all listen to the question that Isaac posed to me about 6 months ago back in episode 32. This archive is for the players. Again, it was one of a set of questions that I've been answering over recent episodes, all against the theme of computer games.
From a game called Civilization, which is a series, I guess, an empire building game, a turn-based strategy game. I wanted to take something from Civ, as some call it, but I wasn't sure what direction to go with, because I guess the idea with Civilization is that there are a lot, you kind of almost try and recreate the histories or the kind of strategic dynamics of lots of different cultural histories or kind of societies. So as a way of trying to bring that a little bit all into one thing, I want to know, because this is a term that I think has come up throughout my study every now and then, what is the cradle of civilization? Does that just refer to, I believe it's called Mesopotamia, which is sort of the Middle East, the kind of Upper Nile region where a lot of big ancient civilizations originated? Is it a broader term? Is it a sort of official historical term, or is it just something that people kind of say informally?
So what is the cradle of civilization? And is it Mesopotamia, the Nile Delta, I guess one often calls the Middle East these days, that area of Southwest Asia, where, Babylon and Egyptian and ultimately Greek, Roman sort of civilization evolved from, and what is contained in the concept of cradle of civilization, or indeed the concept of civilization itself. Is it what's, I guess, some of the ideas in history about that, and how are people thinking perhaps differently about that to the kind of ideas that get passed down in sort of school teaching of history, or indeed in games like Civilization. That's what I'm going to be talking about today, and I'm going to be talking about it very much with the assumption that there's not a civilization, but there are many civilizations. And that is the title of a terrific book by one of my favourite historians, Felipe Fernandez Mesto, which I'm going to be discussing in depth to some degree in both this episode and the next, and even perhaps the one after that. So we're going to have a bit of a feast of civilizations, but in a way also find some surprising connections to all sorts of things, including climate change, in this question. So first of all, let's just talk about the idea of civilization that is presented by the game Civilization. The most direct answer to Isaac's question about cradles of civilization is simple enough. The cradles of civilization are those fertile valleys, particularly fertile river valleys, and starting points of the big technology tree that one finds in, or the tree, this evolving system of civilization that you find in the game Civilization and in many historical accounts, especially the tree that leads from the river valleys of Mesopotamia and Egypt to Western civilization of Rome and Greece and Europe and America, and even far away Australia, perhaps, and also to some degree in more Catholic or more accepting or more broad-minded theories of civilization. Also, the great river valleys of the Yellow and Yangtze rivers in eastern China. And I'll say a little bit more directly about those cradles of civilization and what current historical scholarship has to say about them later in the show. But I also just wanted to pick up that the idea of just one or two cradles or cradle of civilization, of one defining and dominant civilization, is very much tied to an assumption that one kind of civilization is a little bit special, beyond the kind of preference we all might have for our own familiar cultural symbols, and that civilization develops like a child from a cradle, or an organism, a big tree from a seed, climbs a ladder of progress and bends the arc of history towards justice, science, technology, and all the good things in life. And that is very much the idea that is embedded in the game of Civilization. Civilization, the game, is a story of ever-reaching ascent, fundamentally a story of progress and development, which, provided you played a game on a low enough difficulty level, you're unlikely ever to see a major catastrophe of your civilization being destroyed by war, chance, climate, or catastrophe of one sort or another. And it was an idea the designers of the game, principally Sid Meier, took from the histories that they consulted and the ideas embedded in atlases and popular histories of, the growth of civilization, of archaeology, of all the great empires. They consulted in designing the game. The history of the game itself is quite interesting because it is an important game in the history of gaming. It, to some degree, defined a certain real-time strategy or turn-taking strategy game, And it also fostered a whole community of online user-generated content and suggestions for the design of the game. But it was not designed by historians. It was designed by computer nerds, I guess, who also had a bit of a training in natural systems and science, mathematics, and they very much borrowed some of those, inherited historical ideas, I guess, like Isaac articulated about the cradle of civilization being Mesopotamia, and that the pathway of civilization flows through writing and horseback riding and, pottery, and there's all that sort of thing, and there's an optimal path for that development. There's a few little essays online about the history of the game, one of which reports that Sid Meier, the designer of the game, very much approached the game with models from science and natural systems. He had no training as an historian and just consulted various historical atlases to embed a developmental path that worked with the needs of a game, but which he also wanted at least to try to keep reasonably open with not too many predeterminations. And it's been said of the game that it imagines the history and future of humanity as one defined by the contest of discrete civilizations. Ideologies, including capitalism and communism, come and go, but the rise and fall of competing civilizations is eternal. And that in itself is also a bit of a historiographical tradition that we will return to. Over time, the game got more and more sophisticated, not just visually, but also conceptually. There was a little bit more cultural diversity and recognition, I guess, of different kinds of cultural achievements and also human achievements. You end up being able to win the game not just through military conquest or space travel, but also through diplomatic victories, cultural victories, and whatnot. And you also encounter not just rival civilizations, but city-states, and there are all sorts of more complex social and historical dynamics that you need to factor into the game. So I guess it's easy to be critical and say civilization is just representing a tired old image of civilization, and there is certainly bias built into the game. But I think the other thing that they certainly built into the game was just the enchantment that many of us experience in reliving history in that way, and also trying to think about the big grand themes of history. Just why is it that large groups of people who might even be organised in different nations share a common civilization, perhaps, and how do they interact with others around the world, and what is it like to reach the limits of one's achievement in a civilization, or perhaps to transcend those limits constantly. I think in some way, civilization is a wonderful introduction to the appeal of universal, global, world history. Some people have even talked concepts of big history and deep history, trying to look at history not just in terms of what's happened over the last 100 or 200 years, but try to look at the big sweep of history over thousands, tens of thousands, millions of years, and what are some of the patterns and underlying driving forces behind all that. I think it's fascinating, and by putting the player in charge of the dynamics of, building and choosing technologies and research and military strategy and diplomacy, you kind of build up a sense of empathy and understanding of what it's like and just how complex all of those interactions can be. how easy it is for civilizations to make fatal mistakes, at least if they play on a deity level difficulty in civilization. Sid Meier, in fact, said, of the term civilization, it has a grander feeling to it than other words. It hangs this shining light out there into the future. It's a stronger and more evocative word than race or tribe or nation. And how we conceive the likenesses we observe between smaller units or societies and periods that bring together in some kind of cohesive common experience that we seem to have, there seems to be no better replacement word perhaps than civilization, even though that term has some problems with it. It certainly has a vexed history, especially when chained to other ideas like scientific racism or imperial expansion, or when used as the antonym or opposite to terms like barbarians. I am civilized and you are a barbarian. Or primitive, where civilization implies a kind of a development, an unequal capacity development for peoples from different parts of the world. So although there may be some out there who seek to cancel anyone who might use the term civilization or civilizations, I think my approach is very much to respect the curiosity about global or long-term, big, deep, universal history and the grand sweep of the past that draws people to write and read such histories and indeed to play the game civilization. It is a gateway to try to understand the long and very varied human past.